Hello and welcome to the special business meeting for the District of Squamish for Tuesday, April 9th. As always, we're gathered to do our work today on the traditional and unceded territory of the Squamish Nation. Please be advised that this council meeting is being live streamed, recorded, and will be available to the public to view on the District of Squamish website following the meeting. If you have any concerns, please notify the corporate officer present at the meeting. There we go. And can I have someone move adoption of the agenda, please? Moved by Councillor French, second by Councillor Hamilton. All in favor? Motion carries. And I'll just point out we have a council member, Councillor Greenlaw is joining us remotely, so she is in attendance and online, so she won't always be visible during the presentation, but she's here with us tonight. So our first order of business is public hearing, and I have a bit of a script to read as we prepare for that, but if staff wants to start getting set up, I'll read my piece and then hopefully I'll bought you enough time to get set up for your presentation. So this public hearing is being held pursuant to the Local Government Act requirements to allow the public to present and to provide submissions to council respecting District of Squamish zoning bylaw number 2200-2011 amendment bylaw for 40480 Tantalus Road and number 2660-2019. Everyone present will be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard. We want to ensure that no one is discouraged or prevented from making their views known, whether speaking in favor or against the proposed zoning amendment. Please ensure that your remarks are relevant to the matters contained in the proposed bylaw. This public hearing is not an opportunity for members of the public to have their questions answered by staff or council. Any questions or points of clarification can be directed to staff by contacting the planning department. Council is here to listen and will not debate the merits of the proposed bylaw with the public or each other during the hearing. Members of council may ask clarifying questions following presentations. Please note that this public hearing is being recorded and web streamed live, and the recording will be posted on the district's website. Media may be present at public, and the public can advise the media if they don't want their picture taken. Up to and as part of this hearing, the public has the opportunity to make submissions to council. If any submissions were received, they are available for review and have been included as part of the electronic agenda, and that is available on the district's website. We're trying to make this hearing a safe space for everyone to voice their opinion without interference from others. Therefore, I ask that members of the public maintain order and quiet during the hearing. Please do not applaud or interrupt any speech or action of members of council or any other person addressing council. Now I'll ask the planning department to outline what the bylaw is proposing, and then we will have a short, then we'll have some questions from council, and then we will go to the public or the proponent and public to make their submissions. So with that, I hope I bought you enough time, staff, to get underway with your presentation. And if you wish to speak, there is a speakers list. You can sign up in the lobby, and that's where we'll start. And of course, you can raise your hand when we get to that portion. But if you'd like to be on the list, there's opportunity to sign up for that in the lobby at this point. Over to you, staff.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Philip Gibbons, planner with the Community Development Department. And this evening, I will be giving a summary of the proposed rezoning at 40480 Tantalus Road for this evening's public hearing. This bylaw was previously given second reading by Council at the March 19th regular Council meeting. (40480) Tantalus Road is located adjacent to the Garibaldi Estates neighbourhood, north of Tantalus Fire Hall and east of Highway 99. The parcel is split on both sides of Tantalus Road, and to the north are agricultural and residential uses. To the south is the fire hall and commercial and residential uses. And the east is currently undeveloped land, and to the west is the district's corridor trail and Highway 99. The project includes 2 phases with 3 mixed-use buildings. Phase 1 includes Building 1, which is west of Tantalus Road, and Phase 2 includes Buildings 2 and 3, which are on the east side of Tantalus Road. These buildings will include market rental, affordable housing, and for sale market housing options, along with commercial and childcare spaces at the ground level. External amenities include a park and nature spaces and pedestrian and trail connections. Building 1 is a 6-story building with 5 stories of market rental housing and 1 story of commercial space and a partially sunken parkade. There will be approximately 100 residential units within this building, and they will be restricted to residential tenure. Building 2 is a 6-story building with 5 stories of for sale market housing and 1 story of commercial. And finally, Building 3 is a 6-story for sale apartment building with a 465 square meter childcare space comprising part of the ground floor and associated external childcare space. And it also includes a partially sunken parkade shared with Building 2. And in this building, zoning will allow for residential and childcare uses. And the proposed affordable housing component will be housed within Buildings 2 and 3. A new park is proposed adjacent to the highway, which will be handed over to the district, along with protection of the environmentally sensitive areas on the eastern portion of the site. The proposed zoning is a new comprehensive development zone, CD 98, which would provide for the 3 proposed buildings and associated residential and commercial uses. The P3 Park Recreational Institutional Zone is proposed to be applied to the district park to the west, adjacent to the highway, and the P4 Ecological Reserve is proposed to be applied to the environmentally sensitive lands on the eastern portion. The current community amenity contribution offer is shown on this slide for phase 1, which includes the market rental building. It is proposed for the community amenity contribution to be put into park improvements, which is to be developed and handed over to the district. And these will be to the value of $453,000 and bonded prior to adoption of the bylaw. For phase 2, the community amenity contribution is 6% of gross floor area to be donated to the Housing Society. A cash in lieu payment payable at development permit of $1,002,000 and a 465 square meter childcare space. Additional public art and trail contributions will propose to be drawn down from that cash in lieu amount. Additional benefits of the proposal, the previously mentioned market rental building yielding approximately 100 units, no gas covenant for the entire development secured prior to adoption, 20% of units to be 3-bedroom across the development, the environmentally sensitive portion of the lands to be zoned for environmental protection and hand over to the district, and the aforementioned pedestrian and active transportation connections. The proposal meets OCP, official community plan policy by aligning with land use designations, providing infill of vacant underutilized land with compact high density development, provides additional commercial space serving secondary mixed use commercial areas, and provides market rental units close to core transit, shops and services. The project also advances 4 strategic plan objectives: diversity of housing form and tenure types, provision of park and trails and gathering spaces, equity and accessibility of active transportation networks, and provision of employment spaces. Engagement for this Project included a public information meeting, which was held by the applicant on April 19th, 2023 at the Cedar Sky Hotel, and additional consultation was undertaken the adjacent funeral home and the housing society. For the public hearing, a mail out and was undertaken and advertisements in the chief newspaper in accordance with legislation, and 19 written submissions were received today by close of business today, and a petition containing 39 signatures. Issues raised in the written submissions include building height and lack of transition of building to neighbouring properties, traffic impacts, highway access and road safety, including vehicle, bicycle and pedestrian, insufficient infrastructure, flooding risk and lack of emergency resources, associated construction impacts, parking issues and limited transit options, both local and regional, insufficient provision of childcare within the proposal, propose that commercial space should be activated, including cafes, retail and restaurants, concerns about the use of the park amenity, concerns regarding overlooking view and sunlight impacts on neighbouring properties, neighbourhood character issues and property values, and insufficient community consultation. Support for the proposal included the provision of rental housing and lower cost and affordable housing options, the good location, the proposal for additional density and ground level commercial space, provision of pedestrian and cycling connections, improve the vibrancy of the neighbourhood and could provide a community hub, and amenities including the childcare, park space and trail connections. Following the public hearing, Council at their discretion may give the bylaw third reading. If given third reading, staff would then refer the bylaw to Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure for their approval. Pending MOTI approval, staff would then work with the applicant to satisfy conditions of adoption. And finally, the recommendations. That following the public hearing, Council may consider the following recommendations. That District of Squamish zoning bylaw, amendment bylaw 2660/2019 be given third reading, and that prior to adoption of zoning bylaw amendment bylaw 2660/2019, the following items must be completed. Payment of park improvement bond to the value of $453,000. Execution and registration of a land development agreement to secure the applicant's voluntary community amenity contribution, including the following items. Handing over land for park zoned P3 and provision of connection trail from the corridor trail to Tantalus Road prior to occupancy of phase 1. Complete landscaping, public art to be located in the proposed park and amenities to the value of $453,000 prior to occupancy of phase 1, and a cash in lieu payment of $1,002,000 for general amenities and active transportation and parks payable prior to development permit issuance, and CPI to be applied after adoption and renegotiation of amount required if building permit not issued within 5 years. Donate 6% of the gross floor area of phase 2 to the Housing Society. Provision of a 465 square metre gross floor area childcare space and associated outdoor play area. Provision of public art and trail to Coho Park from the development as part of phase 2. 20% of residential units being 3-bedroom across both phases of development. Transfer of ownership of to District of Land Zone P4 for environmental protection. Enter into a housing agreement to secure all phase 1 units as market rental in perpetuity. No natural gas will be permitted for cooking and heating, including hot water. No openable windows will be permitted on the southern boundary adjacent to the funeral home, and enclosed balconies provided for the southern portion of Building 2. A breezeway must be provided through Buildings 1 and 2 with secured public access and activated uses. A minimum of 2,557 square meters of commercial gross floor area for Building 1 must be provided, and 2,391 for Building 2. And water and sanitary modelling to be completed prior to issuance of development permit of either phase, and required updates to district water and sanitary systems must be secured in a servicing agreement prior to issuance of a building permit. Garibaldi Way, Tantalus Road intersection signalisation must occur prior to occupancy of phase 1. At a minimum, signalisation design and construction must include considerations for future active transportation to ensure the intersection can be further improved without significant civil infrastructure changes. And the development must be generally consistent with the proposed site plan, including trail, building, parking, and amenity locations. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. So as discussed earlier, we'll go to council first if there's any clarifying questions from what we've heard in the presentation or anything along the way. And we have also received some correspondence, so any questions that have come from that, this would be a good time. Otherwise, we'll open up for speakers. So I'm looking for council. Any questions at this point? Okay, so for all speakers, please approach the podium to start your remarks by clearly stating your name and neighborhood. Each speaker will have up to 5 minutes to address council. I'll now ask the applicant or the representative to comment on the proposed zoning, after which anyone else will be given the opportunity to speak. Is the proponent wish to speak at this time? Okay. Next, I'll call for any other interested parties to speak. Please raise your hand and wait to be recognized. Details to participate via telephone or WebEx are displayed on the screen for those who have logged in from your computer or are watching the live stream of the meeting. Instructions are also included on the District of Squamish website. Please note that there will be a moderator who will communicate with people participating online. If you've already spoken and wish to speak again, please raise your hand again, whether that's in person or through the methods for participating remotely, to add your name to the speakers list. Once I have indicated that speakers will be offered an additional speaking, once we've gone through, then we'll go back to see if there's additional comments. Do we have a speakers list to work from at this point? Okay, so we're going to start with we'll start with the room. Is there anyone in the room that would like to make a submission for on this proposal? Yes, please approach the podium and start. Your mic's already on, so start with your name and neighborhood, and then you have up to 5 minutes to address council. Thank you.
Great. I'm Tom Honey. I live in the Highlands and have 2 veterinary practices in the Garibaldi Estates area on Tantalus. One of the challenges that I face as an employer is to have staff be able to find adequate housing that's affordable. And I see this project as something that could provide that. And in that there is low cost housing as part of the proposal. And it's small rental accommodation as well. So I think that would be super helpful. And I don't think I would be the only one that would benefit from that. So that's something I'm very interested in. Also, the commercial space is something that could be of interest for me as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your submission. Is there anyone else that would like to make a submission at this time? Yep. Thank you. Please approach the podium. The mic's already on. You just need to start with your name and your neighborhood, and you'll have 5 minutes to address council.
I'm Greg McKenzie from the Highlands. We own 2 properties, the funeral home and then the property on Harris Road, where that has the barn facility. I guess the the main issue that we'd see is really increased traffic, in particular that there's no southbound left turning lane, because currently the increased development up on the north side drives all traffic down to Garibaldi or down to Malcolm. So without another sort of southbound left lane, that additional traffic from the density will actually be driven down further. The other thing is that the development actually doesn't have 2 emergency exits designed in the facility, which is normally required for regulation. And so I would be interested to see if Ministry of Transport actually approves something that doesn't actually have 2 emergency lanes, which most other stratas actually are required. The other issue, particularly for the west side property, is the now increased, once that's been paved, that Hans Waffler's old field is actually quite a large flood control. And so what is that is paved, what is going to be managing to the surface water, and where is that going to be directed? You already see that the new fire hall has actually been raised 1.5 meters up above grade. Now, the infrastructure in that particular area is already insufficient, and you see this every time there's a major flood out in front of the old fire hall and along many of the old ditches that are unable to actually handle capacity. And then the utility that's supposed to be built on the south side of our property, also where the current only access is planned, to handle just the infrastructure that is currently inadequate to handle the development currently in place, where exactly will that water be directed? Either also, if you're going to be having, you notice the crosswalks on there, that are there's going to be any speed mitigation measures? Will traffic speed be reduced? Even if they add the lights at Garibaldi and Tantalus right now, it still wouldn't be adequate because most of that traffic either backs up Tantalus or will back up to 99. And you can see that pretty much every day at around 4 to 6 o'clock for the most part. What else do I have here? What are the long-term flood mitigation strategies for both sets of properties? Obviously, the backside there, on the eastern side that goes towards the park, the south side where it has DFO restrictions to Pat Good Park will help with flood mitigation issues. But what are the plans for going to be on the east side, where they're going to have the building on the east side of Tantalus and the one on the diagonal? Where are they going to be directing that water? If they're going to be lifted up to grade level, where's that water going to be directed? Is that going down into the residential? Are they planning to upgrade storm sewers? Are they planning to upgrade additional infrastructure to be able to handle that additional water? And also, you're going to adding that additional traffic. You're going to be putting, I presume, sidewalks, because currently when it was a dead end road, the sidewalk now has apparently 2 bike lanes put on it. So where exactly is all of that infrastructure going to be putting in place? So you're going to be burying the ditch, because the one ditch is designated as a stream enhanced protection region, which is kind of illogical to start with because it has a gas utility and a water main buried in the bottom of it. And I would ask, can you find me an example in the province that will let you have dug up a stream bed to put a water main and a gas utility at the base of it? Is that going to be buried? Is it going to be covered? How is that going to be done? I think that's pretty much most of my comments.
Thank you very much for your submission. We do have a raised hand online, but I'll go to the room to see if there's anyone else who wants to speak at this point, and then we'll go. This is the heads up that you're on deck for the person online. Is there anyone else in the room that would like to make a submission? Oh yeah, please approach the podium, and the mic's already on. Start with your name and neighborhood. You have 5 minutes to address council.
Thank you. My name is Derek Bergen. I live in the Garibaldi Estates area, and some of the comments that Mr. McKenzie highlighted, I thought I didn't see much description on what we referred today as signalization with Garibaldi Ave and Tantalus Road areas. I could assume that there's some type of traffic feasibility study or something that's being conducted prior to these changes. I live in the area and I've seen on a regular basis, like Mr. McKenzie alluded to, those hours are very difficult to maneuver around in there, and adding this type of construction, I would assume someone must have some foresight about the transportation challenges that we're going to experience. And I would like to see or find out what those studies provide so that we could factor that into the decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're going to we have a raised hand online, and then council will go to council to see if there's any points of clarity from the submission that you'd like to pick up on from the submissions we've had so far. So we'll go to our raised hand online. Our moderator's just making that happen now, so bear with us.
I set the unmute request to him. I'm just waiting to see if his mic turns on. Oh, he said his voice is not working at the moment.
So maybe what we'll do is we'll go to council for any clarifying questions from the submissions we've had so far, and then we'll come back to that online participant. So council, questions? Anything you'd like to pick up on the submissions that we've heard so far, or any of the reading? Councillor Hamilton, go ahead. And then Anderson next.
Thanks very much. The question about emergency exit lanes, emergency access to the property, is that something that would normally be specified at this time? And if so, are the emergency access designs proposed by the proponent sufficient?
Through the mayor, at this stage, we wouldn't be designing frontages to that level of detail. Anything that does get designed would have to meet any applicable codes or standards, including the BC Building Code.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Yes, firstly, a question on the staff recommendation item number 11. I wonder if staff could elaborate on this recommendation. No openable windows will be permitted on the southern boundary adjacent to the funeral home, and enclosed balconies will be provided for the southern portion of building 2. If I could have just an elaboration on the rationale for that, please.
I can speak to that. Thank you. Jonas Laniskis, Senior Director of Community Development, and I was involved in the earlier stages of review of this file because that portion of the property is adjacent to an operating funeral home that has an operating crematorium. We've had discussions with the applicants, and they agreed that to mitigate any potential impact that could be causing conflict between the residential use and the funeral home use on the adjacent property, that one way to resolve those potential impacts would be through implementing some design mechanisms into the building design, such as the ones described.
Thank you. My second question arises from the traffic impact study, the Binney report, and it's referring to an MOTI report, Highway 99 Squamish Corridor Review, expected for completion in early 2024. Has this report already been made available to staff? Is it completed and available for review by our staff?
Through the mayor, I'm not aware of if we have the finalized report yet. Are you? Yeah. But I'm going to turn to Brent McMurtry if he's online. He is, to see if he can answer that.
Through the mayor, Brent McMurtry, Manager of Transportation. As far as I know, there's not an outstanding Sky corridor report, but something that I can follow up on with or contact the Ministry of Transportation.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Pettingill and then French on my speakers list.
Yeah, two questions. One, in other cases where there's potential future noise concerns, in addition to design mitigations, such as being done here in the context of the funeral home, there is a covenant on title. I'm just wondering if staff can speak to why that we wouldn't sort of feel that's necessary here.
Through the mayor. Sorry, can you clarify the noise in relation? Can you just clarify your question? So.
Yeah, so with other developments we've heard close to railway tracks and so on, part of the rezoning that sometimes gets talked about or close to industry is that there's a covenant just sort of notifying future buyers that there may be noise. And so I was just curious why in this case we wouldn't do something similar. I'm not, yeah, just curious.
Through the mayor. There's BC doesn't have any specific requirements for setback distances for facilities such as crematoriums. What's being proposed here is above and beyond what is required by any regulation, and staff didn't consider that a covenant of this nature would be necessary.
Okay, thank you. And then we had some questions about surface water, water runoff management. I'm just wondering if staff can speak to at what point of the process that sort of design consideration is looked at, and also what requirements generally we have about managing runoff and so on.
Through the mayor. Yeah, so that's typically started to be looked at the development permit stage, and then we refine it to detailed design at the servicing agreement stage, which happens concurrently with building permit applications. So that is something that typically happens, or that happens at a later stage once the building and the lot design itself has reached a more definite status. And that is regulated under our subdivision development control bylaw.
Okay, and can you just speak to what our in general our expectations would be, or what our policy sort of would expect that those designs will achieve when they're done?
Yeah, certainly. So the subdivision development control bylaw specifically has requirements for any stormwater runoff from a site to meet a certain design event. And so the expectations is that anyone developing a lot, it is their responsibility to analyze the capacity of the district stormwater system, and then it is up to them to come up with a solution to rectify that. So once the analysis is done, it could involve modeling, it could involve visual assessment of our stormworks, as well as any other review of any other information that we have, such as drawings and reports. They will then come up with a design to satisfy that, and it could be work specific, or it could be works and services or infrastructure specifically on site that is used to help mitigate downstream flooding. It could also be upgrading and construction of district infrastructure as well within the parameters of their site frontage, but it also could extend beyond, and that all is regulated and would be required by the subdivision development control bylaw.
Thank you. I've got Councillor French.
Thanks, Chair. And it just so happens those last two questions from Councillor Pettingill were exactly what I was looking to ask. So I withdraw.
Thank you. A few of my questions have been crossed off the list as well, but in one of the written submissions, there was discussion around about water pressure in the neighborhood. Could someone speak to how that issues such as that, this is unverified, obviously, but how are issues like that assessed in our approval process, just to sort of surface that for the community so they can understand what's yet to do and what's been done to this point that leads to the recommendation?
Yep, through yourself. Anytime that an applicant or anytime that a development comes forward, similar to the stormwater capacity side, it is also the developer's responsibility to ensure that the district's water system has adequate pressure and capacity for fighting fire. So the process would be modeling of the district system to take into account the added development, added growth from this development. And then through that process, we identify any water upgrades required. I'll point out that I did also see that comment as well come in, and I flagged it to bring to our Public Works Department to look into, because that is surprising actually. So staff will take that away on an operational side of things as well.
Okay, thank you. And then that occurs following a decision on a rezone, like in the DP process. Is that where that lives procedurally? Like, trying to understand the timeline.
Correct. That's required prior to service agreement and building permit stage.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, I just wanted to clarify something on the traffic impact assessment study that was raised in one of the written submissions. And I can't quite clarify it as I read the report. Is it assumed in the traffic impact assessment study that the DOAD at Highway 99 intersection would allow for a permissive left turn to the southbound highway? Is that an assumption that's made within the traffic impact assessment study?
Through the mayor, yes, that's correct.
And do we have any intention on actually doing that work in the near future?
Through the mayor, that has been identified through various studies as an option to alleviate the traffic in this area, and so that is something that staff is looking at and working with MOTI.
Is that project currently included in our DCC bylaw?
It is currently not included in DCC bylaw. Staff anticipates that highway upgrades like that will be included in future updates to the DCC bylaw.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go back for more submissions now. We're going to go to one of our online. We're looking for Trevor Benson. Please, we'll just try again and get our technology going here tonight.
I sent an unmute request to Trevor. We also have another call-in user with their hand raised. Not getting anything from Trevor. Should we try the other call-in user?
Yeah, if let's do that. So if you have your hand raised online and you're not Trevor, if you could please introduce yourself and your neighborhood, and you'll have 5 minutes to address council.
Yes, I just unmuted. It's Steve Sutherland from 1015 Dales Place. I got one quick question. One of the pros on the thing for the project was affordable housing, affordable rental. Do we have any idea of what these prices of these units will go for and what their rental prices will be?
So at this point, it's a touch awkward procedurally, but we're looking for submissions so pose all the questions, and then a little bit later I'll circle back to council and see if they'd like to pick up any of your questions to have them addressed. So I would say pose any additional questions you have, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us following your submission.
The basic question is, do we have any idea of what the cost of these things are going to be? Building a 6-story building on top of 2-story houses is going to have a negative impact on the people around. The justification for this seems to be that it will be for affordable housing. So we're adding $500,000 for a park, another $1 million plus a traffic signal, plus 6% of the gross floor area for housing society. All that's going to add into the cost of these rentals and these housings. For the negative impacts, are you actually going to have what you're desired to get by the time you finish building, is my question.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're going to go over to a few more submissions and then we'll loop back for questions that and council can pick that up. So if you have you still have some time on the clock, as it were, if you'd like to make any other submissions. Otherwise, we'll move on to other submissions. And so I think that silence is
that was the question. Sorry,
Okay.
that was the question. Yeah, just going back and forth on muting. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for your submission. We're going to go to try again with Trevor Benson online.
You guys can hear me now?
We can hear you. Thank you for
Fabulous.
joining us. So if you could
My
start
name's
by just
Trevor Benson.
restating your name and your neighborhood, and then you'll have 5 minutes to address council. Thank you.
My name's Trevor Benson. I live in the Garibaldi Estates. I live adjacent to the property in question, and my concerns echo a lot of speakers already. One is the traffic mitigation issue, which we've already seen a lot of increased traffic, and adding these additional properties would definitely add to an already overloaded intersection at the highway and Tantalus and Garibaldi Way. But mainly the bigger concerns that I do have is not so much with the west side building, but the east side buildings, where there was expression of the flood water table concerns. Ever since the previous owner of the field had tried to overload it, there's been water table issues in the area of the property, and how this development would further affect that water table issues and the land in the area that's already being affected and maneuvered because of the water table. And also the other gentleman mentioned about the rear accessory building, in particular 6 stories in between 2 rows of 2-story homes, is definitely overlooking those backyards. And loss of privacy is kind of a big concern for a lot of residents that I've spoke to and neighbors. And that's all I've really have to state and question to council. Thank you.
Thank you for your submission and for joining us tonight electronically. I'll go back to that looks after the 2 folks we had on our speakers list online. Do we have anyone else joining us today at Muni Hall that would like to make a submission? Okay, we'll start. We had a gentleman over here first, and then I've got next will be someone over here, and then down the middle. Thank you.
It's so kind.
You're first past the post. Go ahead if you.
Spencer Fitchin, Garibaldi Highlands. Just a couple of notes. It talked about enclosing the decks in response to the idea that it's going to be next to the crematorium. Have they also looked at the ventilation systems? Most of these buildings will have ventilation systems with powered fan-assisted intakes. And is that also a consideration when being next to the crematorium? Would affect more than just the southern corner of one building. I'm concerned, as most are, with the traffic. It is already very built up. It is already spilling onto the highway and back to the Sea to Sky Hotel, and that whole area is also, it is very congested already. The park, P3 Park, is out next to the highway with the parking lot for the cars against the building. And I would actually think that you would actually want the park for the kids and the families to play close to the building, not against traffic accelerating north from the Garibaldi Way light. The cacophony of traffic going up the highway northbound would make that park where kids and families are supposed to be playing and enjoying themselves. You're putting that right up against the highway. And if you just swap the two, people have to walk an extra 60 feet to get to their car, but at least for safety and for enjoyment of that park space in P3, being against the building would seem to me to be a better choice. And, the last one, stormwater. Yeah. Canadian Tire, London Drugs, Walmart, Home Depot, all of these developments, when they occurred, were encouraged to actually push a lot of their stormwater, retain it, and drive it into the water table. And I don't see any mention here of actually trying to retain as much stormwater on site and driving it into the water table. But not all events are going to cause flooding, but these other developments have in the past been really encouraged. Our water table needs to be recharged. Places like, Coho Park, that's an ephemeral creek that goes through there, and it relies on us recharging our water table. So as much as we possibly can, getting those stormwater back into the ground would be, I think, paramount importance to this particular parcel being where it is. Anyway, those are my comments tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your submission. I had a hand over here. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead. When I think we're all getting into the rhythm now. Just I'm going to if you state your name and your neighborhood, and you'll have 5 minutes to address council.
Yeah, it's Patricia Carlin, and I live next to the proposed development. It's hard to say which of the many things I want to say at this moment. If the concern, I know this hasn't come up this evening, but I see a strong proponent of rental units present. If that's really the concern, why don't we make all the buildings rentals and bring them down 2 stories for those of us who live nearby, and then we'd all be happier with it. Just a thought off the top of my head. I imagine that the proponent of the development wouldn't be able to afford that, but it was just a thought. One of my biggest concerns is I'm on the 3rd house on Starview. My neighbor has a photo of from his drone showing what our yards will be like from the top floor of the building. There's absolutely no privacy, not an inch in our property. We didn't move into a single family dwelling neighborhood to have no privacy. Like I'm standing here with these because I have health issues. I have had for decades. As I'm getting older, it's getting worse. I can't go out and hop on my mountain bike and go enjoy the outdoors that way. I go in my backyard and garden as much as I can. Fortunately, my husband helps me a lot because there's a limit to even what I can do that way. Why doesn't my enjoyment of the outdoors matter as much as the various cyclists in this room, mountain bikers? Another major concern I have is our first 10 or so years living in our house. We were the first house on the block. There were no houses, like the 2 lots next to us between Tantalus and our house, and the 2 across the street were empty. As the ones across the street got built, our houses all shifted. We developed all sorts of cracks. Our doors are all, needed to be fixed to fit in the doorways. So the doors were closed properly. And that's just from a couple of houses. What are these buildings going to do to our place, and who's going to be responsible to fix our homes? Because we're on swampland. It's not like if you're to build up in the highlands, we're all on rock. We're on swampland. And so everything is going to shift like crazy. There's going to have to be major repairs. I have a friend who used to live on Plateau by the development there, and she highly recommended we all take photos of our in the evenings I lose a lot of words, of the concrete in the bottom.
Foundation.
Thank you. Of our foundation, so we know what exactly it was like before and after the development all started. And then there's the issue of hours for where development construction is allowed. I mean, at the moment, it's like 6.5 days a week. And for how many years is this going to go on? I mean, as they started building the new fire hall there in Tantalus, we had a couple of months where it was horrible living there because whatever they were doing at the bottom of it, I don't remember what that was called. So how long is this going to go on for? And they're doing 1 building at a time, I believe. So how many years are we talking about? I mean, how many of you would like to live, say, 5 years next to this every day? And not everybody has the same work schedule. One of my neighbors tends to work evenings and sometimes nights. So she's just out of luck for sleep ever. these things don't get thought about, at least as far as I'm aware. Maybe they do get thought about. That's all I can think of right now. Thank you.
Thank you for your submission. And I had someone right in the middle, and then we're going to go to one of our online participants, and we'll come back to council following that. I think we're into the rhythm now. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Annie Cruikshanks. I live in Garibaldi Estates. Thanks for the opportunity to have this discussion. I just wanted to better understand a bit more the rationale of the 6 stories. That's obviously a concern I think that you've heard quite a few times. It's been echoed in all of the reporting. And watching the development stages from fairly early on, I noticed that it progressively got taller. So where I want to ask the team is, how did it get to 6 stories, and why is it at 6 stories? Because obviously it's going to affect quite a few conditions that we're seeing throughout the neighborhood. Transportation, the water runoff, parking. One of my other questions is related to the commercial space. Parking tends to be a bit tricky on Tantalus Way with the commercial space that already exists. What's that going to look like as well? The water table, we live actually right behind the area in question. And I want to say around 2010, they redeveloped, cut down some of the trees. Some of my neighbors may know more specifics on that. However, once that happened, the water table got very messed up. There's been foundation issues with a lot of the neighboring houses, and it's had an impact on our yard in our area and our house specifically. So I am no seismic expert, but I just want to better understand, has that been thought through in the conditions in that specific area? Because it is so soft and so marshy, and I think we can all speak to that. I think that covers most of my questions. I really want to see, hopefully, some really strong thinking this one through. I know everybody says that, but I think there is some future thinking that needs to be done. When you're putting 6 stories in a neighborhood that doesn't have 6 stories, why did we come to this decision? And it's going to have an impact moving forward. It's a bit of a precedent setting decision that you guys are making. So I really ask that you take that seriously. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your submission. Next, we're going to go to our online participant. We've got, I think it's Devin Biln online, if I'm correct.
No last name, but just Devin's showing. I'm going to send the unmute request.
Just Devin. We'll see. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, can I be heard?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead. If you could state your full name and your neighborhood, you'll have 5 minutes to address council.
I am Devinder Singh Billen. I live in Squamish. And I want to just highlight a few points. I made a written submission earlier, and I encourage councillors, if you haven't already read it, to give that a look. And I thank you to the councillors that have done so, evidently. You've now got two traffic impact studies in the area and a neighborhood plan or a neighborhood area traffic study that are all recommending that traffic from Tantalus must be diverted northward away from Garibaldi Way. The latest traffic impact study says that signalization of Tantalus Way and Garibaldi Way is a necessary but not sufficient step in helping to reduce the immediate impacts of traffic from this development and others in the area, but it is not going to fix the problem. All of those studies recommend either full interchange access to the highway at Newport or Dowd, and I thank Councillor Stoner for prodding a little bit on that. It appears like that's not in the immediate plans, but I hope that the rest of council will push a little bit on staff to explore this issue. I have to assume with the traffic Squamish traffic master plan process that they are looking at a full interchange access at Dowd, and the Ministry of Transportation is not interested in adding any more signals to the highway. So that would have to be a very costly piece of infrastructure. I hope that council will look at that and make sure that the district is exploring that option, is pushing for developers to help fund that option, prior to approving this development and making sure that you are planning for that with the cumulative development that's going on in the area. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your submission. Council, we'll do a round of questions at this point. If anything has come up for you during the last round of submissions or any of the reading, go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, just based on some of the questions, I'm wondering if staff is prepared to give a very high level summary of our housing needs study and some of the provincial changes and expectations around housing, which I think possibly provides some context for some of the what we see before us.
Through the mayor, so the housing needs assessment, I don't know that I'm going to be able to answer this question the best. I'm not sure if Mr. Vilnius wants to jump in on this one, but to speak to the forthcoming changes from the province, the direction has been to build more housing to meet our significant need, which I believe is 700 units over the next 5 years. So in the context of this development, if we were to speak specifically to clarify on the affordable housing bit, all affordable housing would be aligned with our perpetual affordable housing policy. I'm not sure I'm hitting the nail on the head on this question, so.
Through the mayor, could I ask to repeat the question, please?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, it seems that some of the provincial context around the housing bylaws that are coming down right now, we had some discussions earlier today, but also our recent housing needs study, just very tip of the waves what those are saying, just so we can maybe understand some of the context, which I think are relevant to some of the questions that have been asked.
Thank you. Yes, that is exactly right. There is a big push in recent years from the federal government and from the provincial government to allow more housing. Historically, local governments have been on the regulatory side of housing, and that has partially created this issue of not enough supply. So there is a big effort nationally, provincially, and at a local level to increase housing supply. Our housing needs report indicates that we're under delivering housing in Squamish compared to our needs, and that difference between where we are producing housing today and where we need to be is quite significant. So we certainly have to do better in housing delivery in Squamish, and we see that effort at the provincial level permeate into other, not just the housing ministry, but other ministries as well, including the Ministry of Transportation. Our understanding is that historically, yes, the Ministry of Transportation has been very reluctant to make changes to the highway that add more traffic. But our understanding is that that is now changing, as all ministries have to get on board with improving the housing supply. And we expect to see that in Squamish as well.
Okay, thank you. And then one other question, if I might. The traffic study has come up a bit. I'm just wondering if staff can speak to, and concerns around increases in traffic and so on, and what that will mean for intersections and what intersections are required. We also often talk about mode shift, and I'm just wondering if staff can speak to what level of mode shift is assumed in the traffic studies we've done.
I'm going to ask that Brent McMurtry if he can come on for that.
Yeah, through the chair, the mode share target is, and this is based off memory, so I might be wrong, but I believe the existing mode share. So I don't believe this TIA has used an assumption of additional people traveling through sustainable modes. Yeah.
Does that address your question, Councillor? Okay, thank you. Councillor Hamilton, go ahead.
Thanks very much. And following on the affordable housing question, the housing question, there was a question on how the prices of affordable rental units are set. So for those units that are within the perpetually affordable housing policy, that 6% of gross floor area, if I recall correctly, how are the prices for those units set? Could you remind us?
Thank you. Through the mayor's, the perpetual affordable housing policy sets the prices at 80% of the, or 30% of 80% of the median income on an annual basis based on either a two-parent or a lone family household. So it varies annually.
Thanks very much. Varies annually based on the median income of Squamish residents. Thanks.
Thank you. So a couple of questions came up for me. A few things that we've been discussing, like the intersection work and so on for the highway. There was talk of the DCC bylaw is where that would be captured, but they're not yet there. Could someone remind me where we're at with DCC review and when those things would start to show up in that space?
Through the mayor, we're currently out on procurement looking for somebody to run our DCC bylaw update. We're hoping to bring that forward later this year.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful context. A little bit earlier, we did hear about stormwater management, and that's a problem yet to be solved for. In this, I did think, and I was happy with those answers there. I did in other developments like this with some space under power line, we have seen things like retention ponds and so on. So it was a curiosity of mine that we hadn't seen that earlier in the process, but I'm happy to let that process play out and have it addressed at the appropriate time. The questions around water table and like changes when the site's preloaded and all that, given that it is a low and generally wet in that whole sort of precinct, do we have something where does the protections for the adjacent properties live in our regulatory bylaws for that piece of those comments?
Through the mayor, yeah, groundwater is a very tricky thing to work with because you can't see it. You don't know really what's happening underground. The regulations that we have are not explicit saying thou shall not make groundwater hurt your neighbor. Surface water is, as an example, is very well regulated. There's a lot of case law. It's very clear what you can and can't do with your surface water. Groundwater is not. There are no regulations specific to that, which makes it very tricky. So how we handle it with our bylaw is we do require hydrogeological study if the site warrants it. That's typically more seen on steep slopes, that kind of scenario. But it could also be applied to a scenario like this with high water table and this type of an example. And then on top of that, geotechnical analysis of the ground is always required as well. Does that?
It does answer the question. It just begs an additional question is the decision for that to happen. Where does that live? Is that something that happens at a technical level during a development permit, like a future step, or is that something that is directed by council in a meeting such as this one?
No, that would happen on a technical level as we look at the servicing requirements for the site.
Okay, thank you. And then just one more question, then I'll go to Councillor Stoner. There's a question raised around the requirements for the enclosed decks and so on south of the building that around the HVAC. And was there any specific design requirements or any regulations that would drive the ask for some sort of specific design of the HVAC system, given the conditions they're trying to mitigate against, being the crematorium?
Thank you. No, there isn't. And as Mr. Gibbons mentioned, there isn't really any standards in BC for development next to a crematorium. So we're sort of hesitant to add conditions to operation of the building, that we don't have very good basis for. I think if this was an issue, provincially speaking, we would see those standards established and guidelines existing, but we don't have that. So at this point, sort of the unit-to-unit operation is on the southern side of one side of the property is all we recommend. Because this is an apartment building we're talking about, the heating and cooling system is very likely going to be centralized. And so through the design process, the developer will have to decide where is the best location for that, for mechanical equipment.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Stoner and then Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you. Through the chair, following up on one of the mayor's questions, with an expectation of the DCC bylaw update coming later this year, can staff just confirm when we actually collect development cost charges from the developer? Does that happen at adoption, at development permit, or at building permit?
Through the mayor, that happens either at building permit issuance or at subdivision.
So there's a high likelihood that with an updated DCC bylaw, we'd be able to collect that money from this developer at time of subdivision or building permit.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
If our DCC bylaw is updated by the end of this year, would those updated rates apply to this new development?
Yes, correct.
Thank you. I also want to seek some clarification on the location of the park versus the parking. I appreciate the speaker's comments here, but I think that there is a strong rationale for why they are located the way they are. But I'm just wondering if staff can speak to that, or if it was explored during the proponent's development proposal as to the location of the parking versus the park.
Thank you. Yes, it was explored. The part of the rationale why the park is located closer to the highway is because we also have the corridor trail running by the highway. So it is closer to our active transportation infrastructure and will potentially improve access to the park. Moving the park over into where the parking lot area is will not fully mitigate the noise issue from the highway. You're still next to the highway. But it does mean that anybody coming in and driving into the area has to go around the park. Having traffic route around the park is not ideal as well. So part of there could be safety concerns with that. And also part of that parking will serve commercial tenants. And we know that the commercial tenants, if they have parking, they have a strong preference to have parking as close as possible to the building.
Thank you for that clarification. My third question was around the history of this project. So appreciate we need to reach back many years to 2019 when the application first came in. But there was an assumption made that over time this building has actually gotten bigger, as opposed to, my recollection is that the first application was for a nearly 9-story tall building. And I'm just wondering if staff can speak to the evolution of this project over time.
Thank you. Yes, the initial proposal had more density, including more height, that the applicant had decided to abandon early on in the development process. There are certain components of this development, such as rental, that we know are challenged to finance at anything below 6 stories, essentially, in the current financing, interest rate, and construction cost environment. And then, yeah, it really relates to feasibility of development. The land prices in Squamish are quite high, especially for large lots. And that has a huge impact on being able to finance a development that's not 6 stories at this scale.
Thank you. And I had a signal from Councillor Hamilton. You're good. One of those questions was where you were going. Council, any other questions before we go back to submissions from the room? Okay, so we'll go back to the room. We'll come back to, you will have, I'll give you an opportunity to speak a second time. I just want to make sure that we go through everyone that we hear from the first time before we do that. Is that your hand? Yep, go ahead.
I'm John Hawkins. I'm a resident of Garibaldi Estates on the corner of Checkham's Way and Checkham's Place, so quite close to the development. A number of the points that I want to raise tonight have already been raised, but I think to get them on the record, I'd like to bring them up as well. The issue of height is certainly one that's impactful for the neighborhood. I think it was a major issue during the Garibaldi Estates planning process that we recently went through. And, you know, with respect to the comments about affordability, I understand that in terms of feasibility of the project, but what we're talking about, and irrespective of whether or not a developer sort of started with 13 or 9, we're talking about a significant change to the neighborhood and the character of the neighborhood, and I hope that council will consider that. We have a reference point with a spectacle building. It's 4 stories. It's already the highest building sort of north of anything north of downtown. And now we're going to have, you know, 6 stories. It's just in terms of sort of looking at the spectacle and saying, wow, 2 more stories from that. It's really, really significant. I think most of us and most of my neighbors have agreed that Tantalus is a good corridor for increased density, unlike what many of us felt was relatively disregarded in terms of the Garibaldi planning process in more inside the community. But, you know, building 3 is really not in the Tantalus corridor so much as in the middle of it, as folks have mentioned before, a single-family residential neighborhood. So I think that going from, you know, the 4 stories above grade like spectacle to 6 stories is really, really a significant decision for the neighborhood, for all of Squamish, and I hope that that'll be given some consideration as appropriateness. I want to just also mention the traffic impacts and reiterate comments already said today that the signalization at Garibaldi Way and Tantalus is not going to be the solution. When my son, recently teenage son, got his driver's license, I told him that if he can navigate that intersection at 5 o'clock on a Friday, that'll be the most difficult driving test he'll ever have to pass. I've been in an accident there. It is brutal. That signalization is going to direct traffic down my street, Checkham's Way. So the people going left onto Garibaldi Way towards the Highlands can just avoid that intersection. So we'll see increased traffic there. We've got to, and I think that we have to think that the southbound lane at Dowa Drive has to be a prerequisite to this increased development when we've got the development going on with the polygon development. We've got this, we've got Sky Ridge and everything else. So I think the traffic piece is really, really significant. The other piece that hasn't really been raised today I want to talk about is the connection to Coho Park. Coho Park, I think, is, as some of you may or may not know, is actually a really small park. But the trail, which is an easement in favor of the district, connects to essentially what we call the Trestle Bridge, and then beyond there, if you know that trail. As far as I'm aware, I don't believe the district has committed any resources, any funding, any help to that trail and that park, other than very, very basic maintenance at the entrance in the 20 years since it was constructed. There are 6 failing bridges along that trail right now that are arguably incredibly unsafe. The boardwalk is collapsing. We have a degradation of that area over the last 20 years, significant invasive species all around Coho Park, particularly the south end. Now we're talking about all the units that the polygon development will bring in there, plus 300 units that will for sure be connected. I'm sure that that path will end up going all the way through from Packard Park into there. So we really have to think about the steps the district is going to take to maintain that natural space. Because it's, you know, we're going to see a huge increase of traffic in there. The riparian area, which is incredibly sensitive behind Parkway, is severely degraded already. So those are some things that I really hope will be taken into consideration. And I think I'll just leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And then thank you for your submission. And I think, yes. No.
Hi, my name is Maureen McKell. I live in Brackendale. I just want to point out that we're living in a town where people just keep coming and density has become the issue of the day. And I think this is an area where, yeah, there are issues that we have to mitigate and we need to mitigate them. There's infrastructure issues all throughout our community, not only here. And yes, we have to mitigate them here. But we can't, I feel strongly that we can't prevent a project going through that's going to provide density. Even any sort of rental stock, purpose-built rental, which we do not have in Squamish, we really do need to be looking at how we increase that, and this is one of those opportunities. So I'm not, arguing that it changes the neighborhood. Of course it does. Look at downtown. We, 4th Avenue could see through to the mountains, and now I would say they probably can't, but all for the reason of affording people space in a town that is very desirable. And in my submission, I talk about how we've sourced ourselves or outgrown ourselves to the point where people who've lived here all their lives can no longer afford to live here or can no longer find space. And so any rental, that part of the continuum, any rental that we provide is going to take pressure off the lower end of the scale. And we need to do that. Bottom line, we're certainly servicing people who have lots of money and who can afford to live in neighborhoods like Crumpet Woods and like Skyridge and that sort of thing. But we're one community, and one community means we have to ensure that everybody is accounted for and cared for. And I think this is one of those projects that has been going along. And yes, there are impacts, but every project that we've seen in Squamish in the last 10 years have had impacts, and every neighborhood has adjusted. You know me as the previous executive director of Helping Hands, where we built a building on 3rd Avenue, and everybody was, there was a lot of pushback. And now the neighborhood is what it is, and it is accounting for and accommodating people who who once upon a time had housing in our community. So I'm not going to make it into a big sob story, but bottom line is every bit of rental stock that we put in, takes pressure off the lower end of the scale, and I think we need it all. So thank you.
Thank you for your submission. I have Mr. McKenzie as a second speaker, and I'll hold you there. I'm just going to make sure that we get through everyone that hasn't spoken yet, but I certainly won't forget about you. Is there someone that hasn't spoken yet that would like to make a submission before I go to Mr. McKenzie? Yes, Mr. Carlin, please approach the microphone, state your full name and neighborhood, and you have 5 minutes to address council.
David Carlin, and I'm in the Garibaldi Estates area, just north of the development on the east side. I guess my question, first one is, there's 3 wells that have been drilled in the site, 2 in the west section and 1 on the east section. I'm assuming those are to monitor water levels. So I'm kind of confused why you guys don't have data on that, on the effects, because they were done a couple of years ago. Anyway, somebody's got to have information on that. I mean, is that they're there, they're red, they have a little flip up top, and they were drilled by, well drilling equipment. The other thing is, what's going to happen with the Coho River? That's the little creek back there in Coho Park. It's a salmon spawning river. If the water table is really screwed up, I mean, right now it's high because of the beaver dam, but it could be problematic in either up or down if a development of that size, like particularly preloading, where the soil is compressed and it's not spongy, then it could either flood and wash out Coho Creek, or it could divert it and it could just dry up. That needs to be considered, because you can see the dead salmon there after they spawned every year, so it's pretty active. And the other thing is with this many people, okay, we've got the big develop in the one that's the Highline one. They're starting to build now. They're starting to pack for the townhouses, which I think is about 300 more townhouses in there, coming into Newport Ridge Drive. Now they're working actively now. They finished all the 2 townhouses in the hill, but this is the bigger buildings. There's that to consider coming on to Tantalus. Then there's these, another 300 or 307 or 8 suites, and everybody's going to have their pickup trucks and their snowmobiles and their boat and trailers and their camping trailers. There's a lot of extra stuff that's going to sit somewhere, and it's going to drift into the other streets maybe. I just think it's maybe too many people in one small area with inadequate consideration of all their toys and stuff. I don't really see it practically working. Anyway, that's all I got.
Thank you, Mr. Carlin. Do we have anyone else that hasn't yet spoken that would like to make a submission at this time? Yes, sir.
Hello, Mayor and Council. My name is Shane Pittia Thornton, and I live in Garibaldi Estates, specifically on Starview Drive. Just wanted to touch on a few different points and reiterate a lot of the concerns that have been brought up today. It's a significant list of concerns that I think need to be addressed and need to be addressed maybe beforehand rather than providing with the rezoning application approval and then addressing them at a later date. A lot of these need to be addressed at the forefront prior to that aspect of this process. With regards to some of the comments that were made earlier during the presentation that included the concerns, one of them, or the statement was that they'd gone over and beyond or above and beyond to meet the requirements of the official community plan. Some of the community or part of the community plan has a significant portion with regards to the missing middle and housing theory. That would be greatly appreciated for this development. I don't think the 3 6-story buildings of condominiums meet the missing middle theory. A lot of families that are rolling into Squamish aren't really keen on condominium living. They want to have a little bit of aspect of their own space that even townhomes provide. We'd really like to see this development go in that direction rather than these monolithic buildings of 6 stories, in particular between the 2 residential streets of Cheekamus Way, Starview Way, and not to leave out Harris Road, which is also a nominal residence there. The height is a huge concern. That's probably my primary concern. Not to undermine any of the other ones. The other ones are equally as important. The official community plan specifically speaks to that any development has to, and I've got a copy of it here, has to really relate to what's pre-existing in the neighborhood with reference to the character of nearby buildings and public spaces to promote a sense of cohesiveness. Having 2-story and single-story ranchers, both on Cheekamus Way and Starview Way, then having 3 6-story buildings in between them does not promote a sense of cohesiveness in any way, shape, or form. In addition to that, under Section D of Section 36.4 of the official community plan bylaw, it says the sitting massing height of the multi-story building should minimize view and solar impacts on adjacent developments, open spaces, and streets. A 6-story building has significant solar impacts. We are going to lose literally all natural light or direct sunlight throughout the winter months. In the summer months, the shadow cast by the buildings is going to have significant negative impacts, I believe, on the Cheekamus Way residences. It'd be really interesting to have that addressed. And of course, the only way to address that would be to promote a lower height for these buildings. The spectacle building in and of itself is quite substantial in height of 15 meters approximately. Of the buildings that are being suggested here today of 24 meters, it's an additional 9 meters above that. It's a significant amount, especially those 2 stories. I know there's mitigation with regards to the setback of the top floor. I don't think that's going to be sufficient. I think the overall size and shape of the building is going to be significant enough to be extremely detrimental to the residents that are already established in the community. And that needs to be, or at least to have its fair say. I realize that there's a demand for housing. We're not opposed to a development in the area. We're not taking the standpoint, or I'm not taking the standpoint that no development should happen at that plot. But 6-story buildings is just not fair. It's not fair for the neighborhood. I do have concerns with the 3 phases and the length of time it's going to take. I'll just touch on that really briefly. I believe a previous presenter made reference to the noise that was occurring with regards to the fire hall. I believe it was the pile driving portion of the construction. I will agree that that construction was absolutely brutal to be constantly hit with that constant banging noise. I get it. It's part of the process, and that's why I don't think there was very many, if any, complaints received. I don't have any information on that. You guys would be more aware of that. However, to have 3 phases of 3 buildings of that size would considerably be extremely detrimental to the health and well-being of the residents in the neighborhood. So please take that into consideration. I remember being absolutely nauseous at the end of the day after that.
Thank you. Just hit your 5-minute mark. So
absolutely.
Thank you for your submission. And if you'd like to make any additional comments, we'll come back around and do the second speaker. But thank you
for
very
your
much.
time, Mayor, Council.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll go one more submission. We'll go to council again. Is there anyone that hasn't yet spoken that would like to make a submission in this public hearing? I'm asking, I'll just see if there's anyone online as well. But I will, thank you for the help. We're going to make sure everybody gets the opportunity. So yes, sir, you can approach the podium, and as with the others, if you can state your name and your neighborhood, you'll have 5 minutes to address council. And I think looks like we'll have one from online as well. So go ahead, sir.
Mayor and Council, I am Balwinder Baring. I'm living on 2060 Starview Place from the last 21 years. And I just want to speak to mention a couple of points. Everybody had talked about the infrastructure, the traffic, and I echo that. And it's going to be a bigger issues. And the Ministry of Transportation is not going to allow you put another set of lights. So that's as far as I know. So I want to, one thing I want to specifically want to talk about the water table. Living in that area for the last 21 years, I have seen the water table was impacted in 2010 when all the trees were removed. After the trees were removed, a lot of pioneer species came back, salmonberry, blackberry, and now what is happening, now the different species came back. Now it's willow and more some balsam. What's going to happen if the water table is raised and the water is not allowed to go through that area and water is standing for a long time? That wetland species are going to disappear. That's my thought on it. If you don't have to agree on this, but if you walk on Tantalus, see where the water is standing for a long time, all the trees are gone. So that's my major concern. All the areas, the green areas shown on the map, in the next 20 years, they are not going to be there. They are going to disappear. So messing up with the water table, that was done 10 years ago. Please don't do that. It's going to have the impact all the property values. And I also want to mention how the developers are going to compensate, provide some funding. You should also think people who are negatively impacted, they should be compensated as well. All the property holders, they purchased their properties recently based on the assumption that there's going to be a single homes. So be reasonable. If you look on the development towards the end of Tantalus, where the Daward is, and you can see the townhouses on one side, on the east side, and another building, 3-story building on the west side. That's a very reasonable development. And I think you can do further studies on how the water will impact all these buildings. And I don't want that water to be standing there for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your submission. Okay, we have a caller. So we're going to go to, I think it's Tara. Just let our moderator sort of cue that up for us.
I also submitted a written submission, but since attending this great meeting. I've learned of so many new things, and I wanted to.
So just before you start, could you state your full name and your neighborhood, and then you'll have 5 minutes to address council.
Of course, apologies. Tara Davis, 1004 Windsor Place. We recently moved in July, and prior to buying the home, we understood that we were in the in the flood area, but sort of in the outflow area, and in that behind our property, there's drainage systems that were put in place when the development was done in the 90s that no longer work. And when I called Public Works, they said that they're no longer responsible for this, and it just begs the question of hearing the other concerns of the neighbors in the surrounding area of the proposed development. I too have noticed that this proposed area is a major drainage for a lot of the storm waters that we'll have. And I was curious whether there's going to be the developer or somebody from environmental planning on this city of Squamish could do more of an in-depth study to understand the drainage in this area, and also to prevent findings and create a plan for the community. What improvements are they going to make to prevent flooding, and how can we work developers to do this? The other new finding from this meeting that I've learned about is this question of air quality impacts from the crematoria that's coming from the Squamish Funeral Home. Obviously, the developer is making a decision to have closed windows for the new residents of this proposed development, and that begs the question: what data is the developer making those decisions based on, and can that be public data? And is this before this development happens for all of these residents, does the city of Squamish and somebody from planning on staff or in the environmental planning need to do a more thorough, in-depth study on the impacts of pollutants and air quality from such from the funeral home, and should there really be a lot of people living that close in proximity? The only studies that I've been able to learn about impacts are like published in 2020 from the National Collaborating Center for Environmental Health, talking about emission levels from crematory pollutants as combustion gases, particulate matter, organic pollutants, heavy metals that can create stillbirths and carcinogenic effects. So there's obviously laws within different countries, like in the US, in Sacramento and California, you can't build within 500 feet, 152 meters. In South Africa, it's 500 meters from a habitable building. So I would like to know more from the city of Squamish where we stand on that, and from the province of British Columbia.
Okay, thank you very much for your submission. I'm going to go to council. Council, any questions at this point that came up from those submissions we've heard in the last round? Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks very much. I think staff mentioned this earlier, but just wanted to seek clarification. Are there any provincial regulations regulating buildings' proximity to crematorium within BC?
Through the mayor, not that staff are aware of. We, and the name slips my mind, contacted the regulator of crematoriums in BC. And as far as we are aware, there are no regulations related to setbacks for crematoriums.
And this is perhaps a hypothetical question, but I assume crematoriums have been a part of the BC landscape for several generations, for quite a long time. Is that not really a question to staff? So I think that's an observation on my part. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Stoner, and then I'll come back to the audience.
Just further to that, are there guidelines or criteria within the BC building code around ventilation systems, or that BCH would maintain in terms of health quality for the building? Just trying to figure out who where that would fall under. I suspect that there's some sort of criteria around ventilation systems.
Through the mayor, yes, I am not an expert on building code. I'm not a building official. We have building officials who will be reviewing if this development gets to a building permit stage. And local governments are not regulators when it comes to ventilation systems. We rely on the provincial standards when we issue building permits. So yes, there are building code provisions that apply to mechanical ventilation of the buildings that will be adhering to the building code.
Thank you. I had one other question, if that's all right.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Stoner, and then I'll go over to Councillor Pettingill.
I'm just wondering if staff can speak to some of the efforts that have been made. I know in previous iterations of this proposal, there was a lot of consideration around especially the impact of six-story buildings, particularly on the neighboring ALR lot in terms of functionality for ALR land, but also the neighboring properties. Obviously, everything has impact as you go taller. But can staff just speak to some of the amendments that have been made to the proposal in order to reduce the massing and the visual impacts of the building?
Through the mayor, specifically to building 2 on the north side, the 5th story has a setback of 20.3 meters and the 6th story setback of 29.3 meters. Levels from 2 to 4 are setback 14.3 meters from the boundary. And so initially those upper levels had the same setback, but have since been stepped back.
I'm going to ask a question about the shade study, and I'd love it if it could come up on the screen. So I was going to do some foreshadowing for that while I go to Councillor Pettingill. I do next, but just to see if someone can coordinate that happening. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thanks. I think something that can be confusing, and it certainly can be for me, is sort of understanding, we have rezoning, DP development permit, BP building permit, and we consider different things at different pieces. We've talked about that tonight. But there was a question, which is, why don't we consider it all at once and do a rezoning only once everything is worked out? And that's sort of the only step. So is that possible? And if it is there a reason why we wouldn't do that? I'm wondering if that's something staff can speak to at a high level. I'm sure we could spend hours on this topic, but is there a high level reason why we can't or don't do that?
I can speak to that. Thank you. That is a really good question. And it speaks to the different steps in the process. So the rezoning stage is considered conceptual. We deal with massing at the rezoning stage, the kind of amount of density, setbacks, height, but any further details from there, we've got as any local government in BC, there's a process. So for the rezoning stage, you kind of design the building conceptually. You get to a development permitting stage where there's more detail on articulation and there's more detail on massing. And we also look at shading and view implications at that stage. And then you go to a building permit stage where there are significant investments then in the design of the building. And that's where the real details come out about how stormwater management will be done, the ventilation, every detail about the building gets defined at that stage. And the reason why it's structured that way, at least in BC, is that by the time you get to the building permit stage, there are significant investments that have to be made in the building design. And if you try to do those investments in the rezoning process, it will be one, incredibly expensive, and two, you might have to do it a few times over and over again to refine the package. So essentially at the rezoning stage, there's just not enough certainty to make these significant investments from a development perspective. because you don't have any assurance that, if you make those investments, you're going to have approval for land use. So that's why the process is structured that way. And there's a huge amount of risk or a large amount of risk for developers to make significant investments before they know that from a density perspective, they have approval to move forward to that detailed design and then resolve the issues that we often hear about at public hearing stage.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor.
And so just to follow up and to try and make it clear then, we deal with some of these conceptual things there may be an approval, but that doesn't mean then automatically a project proceeds to finish. There are additional steps, development permit, building permit with their own requirements that if they're not met, it doesn't proceed. We just deal with different chunks of requirements at different steps along the way. And we're sort of at the rezoning step, and there will be more steps with sort of hard requirements as we go. Is that accurate?
That's correct. And one thing I'll note is that we very often see, especially on larger developments, things change quite dramatically between that rezoning stage and development permit stage. Because at the rezoning stage, you're sort of dealing with the generalities, the concept. And then when it comes down to development permitting stage, things change, and often things change in the direction of, things have to get smaller, move around a little bit to kind of fit the site conditions.
Thank you for that. I can see that my foreshadowing of wanting the shade study has had someone run away to get something. So we'll come back to that. I thought that might happen. So we'll come back to that question. Before I go back to the audience here, just for more submissions, is there any other questions from council? Okay, so is there anyone that hasn't yet spoken that would like to address? Oh yeah, sorry. Yes, of course. Please approach the podium. We did have a speaker raise his hand earlier. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. My name's Dave Rancier on the Garibaldi Estates, also the proponent. I just wanted to speak about the crematorium. One of the online questions was why we wanted to have the closed windows. That was not the developer. We were okay with opening the windows. It was something that was requested by staff. The question about distance to a crematorium is not where the regulation happens. It happens at the regulation of how the crematoriums operate. So they are not allowed to have pollute the environment. I don't know all the details, but they obviously, and I actually did a study with this because that question came up, and there were about just under 90 crematoriums in the province, and over half of them were immediately adjacent to residential properties in the province. And I mapped all those out, sent them over to staff for them to see that this is not something that is unique to Squamish. There's ones that are in fairly densely, dense areas in Victoria, Vancouver, and other municipalities as well. And while we're at it, the stormwater, the water table is a big concern of ours as well. We've done the hydrological studies. We found what the peak heights were over the past, over a 24-month period. That included the torrential rains we had about 2 years ago. And we are planning to have it so that the highest part of the water table is our parkade is above that. We don't want to go and start building into the water table. That creates all kinds of problems. And so we want to make sure that once the building's built, it actually is built in a way that doesn't create a bunch of maintenance issues afterwards.
Okay, thank you for your submission and for that perspective. Staff, I'm going to wait for your signal when you're ready on the shade study. Otherwise, I'll go to the room. Is there anyone that hasn't spoken yet that would like to make a submission? I'm just going to check online. Do we have anyone online that's has their hand raised? Nope. Okay, so I'm going to go now. I think, seeing as there's no one in in chambers that hasn't yet spoken, I'll go to, I think it was Mr. McKenzie to make an additional submission. And same as before, the caveat with the second round of speaking is that it's sharing information that we have yet to hear, just to
Totally,
keep us from sort of on track with this.
No, absolutely.
So go ahead.
So yeah, Greg McKenzie, my family owns the funeral home and then the agricultural property on the north side. So with regards to the crematorium, because it's the thing that makes everybody in here uncomfortable, the crematorium is provincially regulated. It is inspected, I don't know how many times throughout the year, particularly for maintenance aspects, particularly for checking, upgrading electrical system. The whole unit is actually rebuilt every 5 to 6 years for the firebox. The unit operates at such a high temperature that it actually destroys pretty much most particulate. There's no such thing as fire particulate where you think like a campfire and it raining down. That doesn't exist. It burns at such a high temperature, it doesn't produce it. It's basically like trying to operate any large furnace. If you were to have a natural gas stove, you are more likely to have asthma issues or problems breathing from your natural gas stove than you would from the crematorium. And I can say this because we live above it for 30 plus years, and I have my window wide open next to it, and I have no problems with any of it. Most people in the community probably have no idea it was even operating. The loudest thing on the crematorium is the ventilation fan. So it's the most, what you'll see actually coming out of the stack is actually heat. For the most part, it was actually upgraded from propane to natural gas, and it was built in 1990. It has operated ever since that time without any difficulties. And many of the religious groups in town actually quite prefer to have one close to their community for family reasons. With regards to the building being how close should it be to the facility, generally it's more of a out of courtesy. You know, most of the people that are there, they're during the worst times of their lives, they're grieving. They don't want 100 people on their balcony staring down at them, right? So that's more of something of consideration to be thinking of. You think if it was your loved one's funeral, would you want 100 people sitting on a balcony or looking out their windows, drinking beers, wondering what the heck's going on downstairs? You know, so that's the first thing. And even though the funeral home and the agricultural property are both fenced to the best of our abilities, we would still want a certain amount of setback just because larger funerals that do happen, or particularly with the horses don't like people kicking soccer balls or throwing things against the fences. That's why the fence is higher now, just simply because we've had too many problems in the past. And it is also why it is screened, because we don't want kids, people jumping in or distracting them because they can colic. And in the Lower Mainland, when they colic, there are no good colic surgeons. So if we can't prevent colic from getting too serious, they are euthanized. Same issue we have with fireworks at Halloween. Most of them have to be sedated from about 4 o'clock till midnight because their stomachs twist and they can die. So that's a major part. So we'd like to know if there's going to be any barriers to help. Like we have our existing barriers, but a setback to keep as much activity away, particularly from the funeral home or the horse side. And that's why we're asking, is there going to be 2 entrances for particularly the property on the west side, not only for emergencies, but also we don't want to be directing all traffic through one entry point. With regards to the parking in front of the funeral home, it is a verbal agreement with the fire hall that parking is used for funeral patrons or for emergency services only. When they get called out, they don't have time looking for parking or trying to muck around in front of the spectacle or whatever else. They have to park their vehicles and they got to go. So for the most part, if they are planning to build any sidewalks, something like that, we need that parking to maintain, not only because the first part of that parking is actually still our property. I can't recall it. It's about 1.5 meters that extends out. But also because it's really for when they have to go, they got to dump their vehicles and get going. Because 80% of the calls go north, not south. So they don't really have time to be looking around for things of that nature.
You're at 30 seconds to go, just so you know.
Yeah, I got it. As far as the infrastructure is concerned, whether it's traffic or if it's with stormwater infrastructure, how will that be funded? Obviously, the proponent can't be paying for all of it. In many of the things that they're going to be doing, increased pipes, drainage blocks, whatever it may be, if the system in the area can't actually handle the water that they need to divert, what is the plan to actually fund that upgrades to the system?
All right, thank you. You've reached time. Thank you for your submission. Is there anyone else that either first or second time speaking tonight that would like to make a submission? Not seeing any right now. I'm going to take the opportunity. We'll come back to you, Sarah. I'm going to try to get the shade question addressed here. Do we have the shade report? I couldn't quite get it big enough on my screen here tonight to check it in relation to some of the comments we heard. So can you just maybe run us through what we're seeing here? I just can't quite make out I'd like to think I'm not alone. For those that are visually impaired.
I can blow each individual area up, but not obviously all at once. But just as an overview, so in the top left-hand corner, we have the winter solstice, and we go left to right, 9 a.m., 12 p.m., and 3 p.m. And then we have the equinox on the second row and the summer solstice on the bottom line here. So let's see if I can.
I'm going to say that it's that top row that is likely of the most interest, given how valuable sunlight is at that time of year.
Yeah. So we've gone full screen now. So my plus symbol has, here we go. So we can zoom. Okay.
So does this mean that this is the whole piece of this is darker than the others? Does this mean that if the sun got there, that's what it would look like, and the sun isn't up at all at this piece in time? Because this is distinctly different from 9 o'clock at the solstice. Or is that just a formatting piece? I'm just trying to understand if you scroll down.
So that's the winter solstice, 9 a.m.
Yeah. So the next piece down has, see, it's all white. Like, is that trying to signal something, or is that just a formatting piece with this file? I'm just trying to understand.
Specifically, so this is the most clunky mouse I've ever.
So I know I asked for something that wasn't included initially. I'm trying to understand where that looks to me like, I know at my house the sun might not be up at that time of day. So is that what they're trying to signal there? That doesn't quite seem right to me. I just want to understand when the shading happens. Is the sun behind a mountain at that point, and that's why that modeling is all dark like that? Or is it just this, or should I ignore that overall shade difference and just be looking at what's modeled next to the building?
I'm not sure on the specifics of that particular, but generally speaking, so on the equinox of March, you can see the shadows projecting from the buildings, and it shows where the shadow impacts are. In this case, at 9 a.m., we have some small impacts on the agricultural land here, and then mostly cast on the road.
I think for me, it's this winter solstice, like the worst case scenario piece. I understand that things get, things get better for all of us when we're not in this winter solstice mode. So that slide there, the first one, it's just the whole slide, the whole piece is darker. Is that for any particular reason, or does that signify something, or is this just formatting. Thank you.
Through the mayor, yeah. So you're correct. During when the winter solstice, so December 21st, sunrise in Squamish is 8:08 a.m. So it's not in full light till later in the day. So typically in shadow studies, they will represent that there's some existing shading from surrounding mountains, for example, when the sun comes up, and that's why it's on full light like the rest of the drawings.
Okay, thank you. On this point, go ahead, Councillor French.
Mayor Herford, on this, I live on the other side of the highway from this complex, and the direct sun doesn't hit my house until about 9:45, 10 o'clock at this time of year. So that graying is representing that there's a mountain that substantially blocks direct sunlight.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was assuming, but I wanted to make sure that everybody had eyes on the study. So then we look at the middle piece, which is midday of the same day, the worst case scenario day. And this is where we see shading from the building. Can you parse out I can see the effect on to the north there. Obviously that's where there's going to be shadowing, but the shadows are in strange shapes. Can you parse out the difference between what's being cast by the existing buildings and what this proposal would be responsible for, what shadow this proposal would be responsible for casting there? You see what I mean? It gets all kind of strangely shaped, which doesn't quite jive for me.
Are you specifically talking about this part of the shadow?
Yeah, and I think some of the shadows that are there are cast by the buildings on that property on the adjacent property that already exists. So I'm just trying to, where does it transition from shadowing from these proposed buildings to shadowing of the buildings that already exist on that site to the north? I'm just trying to understand that, like, this is the worst case scenario piece. So to me, this is the important piece.
I think we'd need to, with obviously preparation, create a drawing that had different colors representing existing and proposed shadowing. This shows all shadowing.
Okay, that's fine. I think just if we go down to the next piece, which is the equinox, or sorry, we had winter solstice, and then there's somewhere in between those two, I think. Okay, so this, I think it's a bit clear, and could you speak to, and things get better from here as we approach the summer solstice. Could you speak to the requirements or the efforts taken to minimize the shading impact? I know that it's dark in those that worst case scenario piece is a challenge, but what steps were taken to minimize that shadowing to adjacent properties?
Through the mayor, general building setback, and then also, as I mentioned earlier, additional setback of the 5th and 6th stories on building 2. So building 1 is set back further from the boundary than building 2, but building 2 has those additional setbacks at the upper levels.
Okay, so that's how we see a similar impact to the overall shading because of that stepping back.
Correct.
To reflect that. Okay, thank you. I think this gives me some context. I want to make sure that this particular piece of work was sort of shown at this meeting. So thank you for that. And Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, just related to this topic, am I correct in thinking we see some of the shading stuff now to provide a bit more context, but actually where we really deal with shading impacts and design changes would be at the development permit stage, is where we'd really really sort of more formally deal with any shading concerns, or is it at the rezoning stage where we would typically deal with that?
Through the mayor, it depends on project you're looking at. Here we are approving heights and setbacks, so effectively creating a building envelope, which any development permit would be theoretically could build out to whatever the maximum allowed under the zone. So effectively, we are looking at those shadowing impacts at this stage.
Okay, and then also, and just because I want to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of expectations, because we've spent a fair bit of time on this topic, but you know, we do have policy speaking to shading and a number of other things. Am I correct in thinking that there isn't an expectation of no shading impacts? It's sort of, as a council and a community, we try and weigh all the sort of sometimes conflicting things, and so it's something we consider, but it is generally or can be acceptable for some shading impacts from some development.
Through the mayor, that is correct. As has been highlighted by a number of people tonight, or generally all development has some level of impact on adjacent properties. So some level of overshadowing is to be expected.
Okay, thank you. Council, any other questions? And thank you to staff for digging this piece up. It didn't found that was useful. I'm not seeing any other hands here. I just want to make sure, Councillor. Okay, so I'll go to. Sorry, yes, I had. Yep, go ahead. You can make an additional submission with the same caveat as earlier. We're looking for ground we haven't yet covered.
Thornton again from Garibaldi Estates. Just want to touch really quickly. I'm sure I won't take the full 5 minutes this time. I realize that the housing issue shouldn't be just a carte blanche means of just putting up massive developments like this, in particular in residential neighborhoods. Just wanted to make that point. I do appreciate that there is housing needs in Squamish in particular, but it shouldn't just be that golden pen that we can just throw up 6-story high rises adjacent to residential properties. With regards to the sun or the shadow analysis there, I'm hoping that there's a little bit more to it than that. Most shadows that affect properties happen in the evening time and don't just end at 12 p.m. It does look quite accurate that at 12 p.m. in the summertime, that shadows would be fairly reduced as the sun would predominantly be directly overhead. In the winter months, in the evening, that's when the estates primarily gets most of their sun. The shadows would definitely lengthen in the later part of the day. Just wanted to, I hope that that's part of the analysis. It just, maybe we didn't scroll past that part up there. I know there's a proposition for new zoning coming in for Squamish. I would really, and supportive of it. It does limit new developments or developments for the new zoning to 11 meters. I believe, or in that 3 stories or 11 meters, whichever is less. Just hope that maybe that reasoning would be applied to this development or the considerations of it. At the end of the day, though, please don't lose sight of what this is. It is 3 6-story condominium buildings between residential homes on fairly quiet residential streets. Thank you, Council and Mayor.
Thank you for your submission. Just on that, can you? So we spent a lot of time on this middle side. Can you just show the other piece of the shade study? So it goes morning, noon, and I forget what the time is. This is a standardized piece as well. It's 3 o'clock, and that's we're at equinox. Okay, so that's where it's sort of standardized that the shade studies happen for better for worse. That's the criteria. So there is some consideration of the afternoon sun. That's the winter version, and then equinox and solstice. Okay, Council, any other questions, or do we have anyone online? Ooh. Okay, we have Trevor Benson is online to make an additional submission. And as I stated to the others, we're looking for new information. Please limit your comments to that, but you have 5 minutes to address council.
Yeah, I just wanted to make an addendum to this shadow study. The one component that is definitely missing is the summer solstice evenings. We do get additional sunlight past 9 p.m. coming out of Squamish Valley, especially on the Cheakamus Way side. And I'm curious that I don't see any visual of the shadow cast on the building in the evening in the summer. And that part's missing. I mean, again, that's where I'll state where our biggest concern is. We do need housing, and I'm for housing. I'm just looking forward to responsible development. And the west side I see as potentially acceptable. The east side, I express concerns on the height and the impact on the existing residential housing. And yeah, that's basically what I just wanted to bring attention to is that I don't see that summer component impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Council, any additional questions? I'll look to, go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, and totally fine if staff don't have the specific information on hand. We've heard a lot about side setbacks and pushing some of the buildings back. From my understanding and reading of the zoning bylaw, this is one of the most generous setbacks on side setbacks that we have in our current zoning bylaw. Like 14.3 meters is typically unheard of on a single family lot that would allow, as we discussed this morning, committee of the whole, an 11-meter building. Our side setback is 1.2 meters. So I'm just wondering if staff can try and contextualize the setback relative to other like developments of this scale. And sorry to put you on the spot, but I'm just trying to figure out, like, we have seen this level of this kind of size of development across the community at 6 stories. But I don't know if I can think of another project that has upwards of 14 meters setbacks.
Through the mayor. Yeah, without sketching up some drawings, it's be only really speculating. But yeah, I mean, I guess if you're looking at 11 meters, 3-story building at a 1.2 meter setback, the shadow impacts, if that was directly across your back fence, would be significantly greater than a 14 meter setback with a 24 meter building height.
Thank you. So we don't have any other additional questions from council at this point. So and we've heard from, yeah, was that? Hope you're okay. I'll go to Councillor Stone.
Sorry, one additional question. In terms of parking requirements, just trying to remind myself, are there any variances to the current parking requirements as proposed in this development?
Through the Met, no variances to the parking requirements proposed as part of this rezoning. Parking would be assessed at development permit stage and would either need to apply for a variance or comply with current parking regulations.
And now I see no more questions from council. Thank you for that question. And we've heard from everyone that was looking to make a submission, and some multiple times. So I do have some things that need to be said to bring this part of the evening to a close. And I'm on the wrong page. 1 second, please. So if there are no further speakers, I'll ask, and I've asked council that if they had any additional questions. Now that everyone's been given a reasonable opportunity to be heard, it is a requirement that I ask 3 times if there is anyone else who wishes to speak before we close the public hearing. For the first time, is there anyone else who wants to speak or make a submission? For a second time, is there anyone else who wants to speak or make a submission? Yep. Please approach the podium, and as I've said to other speakers, you'll have 5 minutes to address council, and the floor is yours.
Thanks. A couple things that a neighbor of mine brought up, who she had to leave for various reasons. She had some questions about if Squamish Nations has been consulted about this, since it is known as a wildlife corridor, and perhaps in the past there may be some of their ancestors' bones buried in the area. I have no idea. Neither did she, which is sort of a question in passing. And the other, like, speaking of wildlife corridors, I often see online people having fussy fits about, oh, there was a bear nearby, blah, blah, blah. Wondering how it's going to work with these buildings. You know, because it is an area with bears. I mean, a bear got in the neighbor's garden today, or into garbage today. Yes, that shouldn't happen, but that wasn't us. Yeah, there was something else and it's gone. Anyway, just a couple of things.
Thank you very much for your submission. Perhaps I'll take up the question around archaeological protocol and what that looks like, sort of in general. If someone could speak to sort of where that sits in the development process.
Through the mayor. So currently the province provides us with a layer of where there are known archaeological or areas of high archaeological concern. So I don't believe this falls within that. There are also chance findings. So if you were to find something, in theory, there is then a protocol that you would have followed that is done by the province. The district's also seeking a grant currently to develop our own chance find protocols, and also to work with the nation to develop another layer of archaeological and development approval information area to help guide us moving forward.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to go back to the to my script here, and thank you for that submission. I think that was really important. So now that everyone's been given a reasonable opportunity to be heard, it is a requirement that I ask 3 times if there is anyone else that wishes to speak before we close the public hearing. For the first time, is there anyone else who wants to speak or make a submission? I'm looking to I'm looking to staff to indicate if anyone raises their hand online. For a second time, is there anyone else who wants to speak or make a submission? And for a third and final time, is there anyone else who wants to speak or make a submission? I now declare the hearing closed. Thank you very much for your submissions. Please note that council members are not permitted to receive any further submissions or hear either a proponent or opponent to an application once the public hearing has been concluded. This means we can't speak to you out in the community or receive emails or phone calls on any of the bylaws until a decision on the bylaws has been made. And any and all communication from this point must be channeled to staff. This is done to ensure that the public sees all the information that council has used to arrive at the decision, whatever that may be. So thank you very much to everybody. And council, our next item is consideration of third reading. And what we'll do is we will take a quick recess. It's been a bit of a, we've had a good stretch of work here, so we'll give a chance to stretch, and then we'll consider whether considering third reading is appropriate at this point. And when we come back from that, so let's take a 10-minute recess. So we'll come back at 8:25, and we'll continue our meeting at that point. Thank you. Okay, we need to call the meeting back to order. We're calling the meeting back to order. Hello, I haven't used the gavel yet, my term, and I don't want to do it for this. Try to keep a clean there. So thank you very much. We're call the meeting back to order. And we're now on to agenda item 4A, consideration of third reading for the Tantalus Road project that we just had the public hearing for. So council, I suppose one of the decisions here, first of all, is whether we're ready to consider third reading or if we need more time with to digest the submissions that we've received both in chambers or in chambers online and written submissions, or if we're ready to have this conversation. We don't have a presentation, obviously. We just had the presentation and discussion on this. So I'm looking to council if there's a mover or if someone would like to make a recommendation. Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks very much. I'd like to move third reading of 40480 Tantalus Road.
Okay, thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor French. Thank you. Councillor Hamilton would like to speak to it.
Thank you very much, staff, for all the work you've been putting into this rezoning proposal for the last 5 years, if I understand correctly. This project there's been many iterations of this project because there are many challenges, both on this lot and in our community. We hear about many of those challenges. We heard about many of those challenges here tonight, and we know about many of these challenges. Council has a difficult job of trying to balance the benefits of community growth with the harms caused by community growth. And that's something that I think we all need to reflect on, that as we have moved into this community and as our houses were built, that disturbed our neighbors. As we enjoy our community, we also have, in a sense, an obligation to welcome people to our community. And part of that is allowing our community to grow. So with that, I think that the benefits of this proposal, particularly in the contributions to our perpetually affordable housing society, the addition to market rentals, and the addition of the park spaces to our park network, make the benefits of this project outweigh the harms that are caused to the immediate neighbors and the immediate neighborhood of the community. And I do understand that there are harms there, but there are benefits to our community as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone? Councillor French.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I want to thank all of the speakers tonight. It takes something to get up and stand in front of that podium. It's not for everybody. And for some people, it's really freaky and scary. And so for those who got up and spoke tonight and didn't want to, thanks for being bold and thanks for sharing your thoughts. And also thanks to those who submitted through email and didn't necessarily speak here this evening. And I want all those who submitted in some way to know that you've been heard. We listen. We listen hard, and we know that the decisions we make at this table have real world impacts on people who live not just in this neighborhood, but broadly across the community. And I want those who expressed concerns tonight to know that I believe that your concerns are valid, very valid. Now, having said all that and reviewed years worth of information from when this proposal first came in front of me to sitting here today, evaluating all of it carefully, mindfully, I will be supporting third reading.
Thank you, Councillor French. Other comments? Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. I will also be supporting third reading. We've come a long way on this project. We've together with the developer and the community, we've been down a road already in this general direction. I know I share many of the concerns we've heard tonight, and I'm hoping that and I'll touch on a few that I hope will be addressed ongoing. Firstly, traffic. I'm going to rely on Mr. Velaniska's assurances that, or I guess guesswork, that the province is going to start to listen to us on the highway access issues. This is why I asked about the early 2024 MOTI study. I think we should all be interested to see that if it's new information and monitor this very closely. But I'm hoping Mr. Velaniskis is right. The province is going to be listening more carefully to our concerns relating to growth and highway access. Parking. I'm hoping that the Mackenzie family's comments on this will be listened to very carefully. They have long experience in this neighborhood, and I have listened to their concerns over a long period of time myself. And also as a patron, the odd time of the funeral home, I've seen the issues firsthand. They have also arisen with respect to the district's active transportation plans in the area. I think we have to listen to this common sense of long experience from the neighborhood regarding sidewalks and parking in the vicinity. I'm happy that Mr. Hawkins has raised the issue of maintaining the natural habitat in Coho Park and Main Creek as a stream keeper. I know it's an ongoing issue looked after by volunteers largely, and we don't seem to have the programs in place to address this. Programs, policies, we have a ways to go. We've heard a lot about drainage and ground conditions. It's been an education for me and perhaps for others. Listening to both of these two topics on habitat and ground conditions, it seems to me, again, we must look at holistically as to whether we should be focusing on the valley bottom or the hillsides for future growth. Do it honestly. Finally, air emissions from the crematorium. I'm skeptical that the recommendation of closed windows is really necessary. We have biomass boilers in our community. The school district operates 2 of them. They're very common boilers of this nature. And I think that I'm hoping that we can look at, with good information about the state of affairs today in monitoring these kinds of facilities. I am more sympathetic to the privacy concerns of the funeral home with respect to those south-facing windows. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments on this? Go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thanks. I'll be supporting this development. I do agree there's some trade-offs here. One that I have raised a few times is my concern about the amount of employment. And we've had a discussion, I won't go into it too much, but I think as we build housing, whether it's in a given development or nearby, there needs to be a plan where we're matching housing to employment, where if you have a job, you can afford to live there. Otherwise, I worry that we would be building housing for Vancouver employees. We've heard more recently that we actually have much, I think, lower levels of commuting than people expect. But I don't want that to go the wrong way, and I like to keep people working here. So that is one of the pieces where I think there's a bit of a concession. I think our housing needs study says we need 6,840 additional housing units by 2031. And we, with the new provincial regulations, need to review that. So that's the massive challenge we're facing. And we understand that sprawl actually adds cost to existing taxpayers, and those impacts we have as human beings impact the natural environment we care about so much when we sprawl. And so we're trying to find ways to infill and build within our current footprint. And that's where some of the trade-offs between higher buildings, more dense, comes in. We hear about livability for seniors, and this is a flatter area, the economy of scale, where you can do elevators and stuff that people with accessibility challenges or seniors need. That sort of thing is possible with a larger building like this. There's some comments about traffic impacts, which I share. I am concerned that all the discussion and the reports assume no mode shift. For me, I agree it's not workable without mode shift, but I think proceeding as a society and surviving is also not possible with mode shift. So I think we need to be starting to talk and think about how are we going to challenge these problems with mode shift. And we're doing some of those things with our investments in transit and active transit and so on, and there's more that needs to be done. But I don't think we should keep talking as if there's no mode shift, because that's not a viable future reality. The market rental and below market rental here is critical. We didn't talk much about the childcare spaces, but there's a significant amount of childcare space, which will make sure that this development is not exacerbating existing childcare needs, which is really important. We've been reviewing this application since my first term on council. Council requested reductions in height. We've seen that there's been changes to the orientation and impacts on the neighborhood. And I realize it doesn't address every concern that's been raised, but we have worked really hard to try and balance all the competing interests here. Again, it's not perfect, but I think it gets to a place where it does meet the thresholds where some of the trade-offs are acceptable. I think the hydrology concerns are things we do need to pay attention to. So as we proceed forward, I expect to see a great deal of staff scrutiny to make sure that we aren't creating new hydrology problems with this. And I'm sort of a bit past my time, but with that, all things considered, I am comfortable supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I have Councillor Greenlaw next online. Go ahead, Councillor Greenlaw.
Thanks. Through the chair, I won't be supporting third reading for this project. I do appreciate a lot of the comments that Councillor Pettengill in particular just made, but my concerns still gravitate towards my previously voiced concerns around carrying capacity for our region. And in addition to that, I do have a lot of concerns about the traffic, the added traffic around intersections that are currently failing or will fail with the volume introduced by this project. I'm also very curious about the flood mitigation concerns voiced by Mr. McKenzie and the subsidence concerns voiced by Ms. Carlin. And I'd also like to say thank you to Ms. Mitchell for her contribution. And she presented some really hard realities about housing in our community in a very eloquent way. And thank you to everybody who engaged in the process.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, I will be supporting third reading this evening. This is a project that I have pushed back on and not supported through the previous readings in an effort to try and get to a better place. It is always a bit of give and take with proponents and with the community in terms of trying to find a good balance of what is necessary. And the number of things that are necessary within our community, the list is extensive. As I reflect on where we've landed, this is not a perfect development, but it is meeting a lot of the benchmarks that we know are desperately needed in our community. And predominantly that's the housing needs assessment, which requires, as Councillor Pettengill mentioned, 6,840 new homes by 2031. The phasing of this development that puts the market rental first, and then the 6% gross floor area dedicated to the housing society and be kept in affordable housing in perpetuity will be a huge asset in our community. And while I do very much appreciate the comments that were made that housing and the need for housing is not a carte blanche for all housing and all development everywhere, it does require us to really scrutinize how we bring these housing units forward. And while everybody, I think many people would prefer to live in a single family home, that just isn't a reality for a lot of people, and a lot of people who want to call Squamish home. And a lot of people actually don't want to live in a single family home, and they'd be happy to live in a condo. And we've required that 20% of the condo units that are being provided are 3 bedrooms and will be provided enough bedroom spaces for families who may choose to live here. This is an area that is very clearly designated in our OCP as clearly walkable to some of the core amenities in our community, to transit. And so being able to actually live here without a vehicle is possible. And that's not always possible across our community. And so that is why I think that some of those core components are really being met. In addition to the childcare space, and the proponent's willingness to benchmark their community amenity contribution cash in lieu to the CPI over time. I think that's the first time we've seen this, and I want to acknowledge the proponent for doing that. I do think that there are still outstanding concerns around traffic in the area and the traffic impact assessment that raised some substantial concerns for me. But I do think that the timing of our DCC bylaw update will ensure that this particular proponent pays its fair share for growth and solutions towards a much bigger issue within the Garibaldi Estates in terms of access to the highway. We know that this is an issue. We know that this is one development that is going to make that worse. But I don't think it's entirely on this proponent to solve that issue. And so I think we update our DCC bylaw, we ensure that we collect enough money from this particular developer and any future developers, and we continue to work with the province to make sure that we have a functional solution in the long term. With that, I'll leave my comments there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll be speaking in favor of the motion. I would like to thank everyone that submitted tonight. And what I heard is we're folks from the neighborhood that take great pride in the neighborhood and have some very real concerns. There is a process for development, which we did speak about during the public hearing, questioning around what the next steps look like. This isn't approval of this tonight. Isn't go forward and build this. It's if you can solve these other challenges, then this can move forward. So there will be additional work around the stormwater piece. We've heard a lot about the groundwater. I think that's known to be a concern in the area. And now the proponent can go ahead and make those investments to see if those are solvable problems to continue moving this project forward. It's been a long process to get to this point, and I think I just outlined what could be a long process going forward to solve for some of those pieces through the next pieces of the process. I would like to really, when we step back and look at the percentage of this overall parcel that's being preserved for park, is something that I haven't really heard here this evening, but it's substantial. I'm bad at guessing percentages based on drawings, but it is substantial. And I know we have more work to do around. There are some great concerns brought up around Coho Park and how all these things, how we maintain what we have, and as we add more additional parks, this will be a consideration done through ongoing work on park investments in general. But I think the preserving of the substantial part of this property as park, both in program space and in essentially nature reserve style of parkland, is incredibly important. There was a lot of discussion around shading today, and I think it's and as was mentioned in some of the comments, I really think with the generous setbacks here, not only to the building overall, but then throughout the building as it goes up, it steps back the upper levels. I'm quite impressed with the efforts there to minimize the shading to the neighbors, where a single family home built to the allowable height in the zone with the minimum setback would provide a substantially larger amount of shade than this building. It's counterintuitive, I know, but through the modeling, we're seeing that's the case. And similarly with knocking 2 levels off the top of it, those top 2 levels, because they're stepped back so far, have little to no effect on the shading in the darkest times of the year. And so I thank the proponent for taking those considerations into effect. And with that, I'll call the question. All in favor? And opposed? Councillor Greenlaw opposes. Motion carries. Thank you. Can I have a motion to terminate? Moved by Councillor French, second by Councillor Stoner. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. We recess the last No, we didn't